When famous pianist Julian Croft told the single dad janitor to play piano as a joke, he expected humiliation. What happened next shocked everyone in that elegant concert hall. Sometimes the most extraordinary gifts hide behind the most ordinary faces, and one moment can change everything forever. The golden chandeliers cast a warm glow across the polished marble floors of the prestigious concert hall. Crystal glasses clinked as distinguished guests in evening wear mingled. This was where musical legends were born. Julian Croft adjusted his silk cravat, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. At 55, he was a titan of the classical world, and he commanded respect wherever he went. Tonight's recital, featuring Chopin's most challenging pieces, would be another triumph to add to his collection. Child's play for him. "Mr. Croft, everything's prepared for your performance," came a quiet voice behind him. He turned to see a man in a simple grey janitor's uniform, probably in his late 30s, with weary eyes and hands that spoke of tireless work. His name tag read Leo. "Thank you," Julian replied dismissively, barely glancing at him. He was accustomed to being surrounded by admirers and donors. Staff members were merely part of the backdrop. Leo quietly moved through the guests, ensuring everything was perfect. He'd worked at the concert hall for 3 years, arriving early to mop the floors, dust the seats, and polish the grand piano, preparing the space for performances that transported audiences to another world. He loved these evenings, though he always remained invisible. The music that filled these walls stirred something deep in his soul. Sometimes, when the hall was empty and dark, he'd run his fingers over the piano keys, imagining what it would feel like to create such beauty. Julian noticed him again as he carefully wiped a smudge from the piano's surface. His touch was gentle, reverent. How amusing! Did this janitor actually think he understood the complexity of what he did? "Careful there, my good man," Julian said with a condescending smile. "That piano is worth more than most people's houses." Leo looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. I know how precious it is." "I'm sure you do," Julian chuckled, turning back to his admirers. The audience began taking their seats. As Leo took his position at the back of the hall, neither he nor Julian could have imagined how this evening would unfold. The lights dimmed, and Julian walked confidently onto the stage. His fingers danced across the keys with the precision of a master. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 flowed from the piano like liquid gold. The audience sat mesmerized. From his spot near the back wall, Leo closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. He knew this piece intimately. Every crescendo, every delicate passage. In his mind, he could see the story the music told. His fingers moved unconsciously, tracing the notes in the air. Music had been his sanctuary, his only escape. "Magnificent, isn't it?" whispered Mrs. Albright, one of the venue's major donors, to her companion. "Julian is simply incomparable." Julian finished the ballad to thunderous applause. He stood, bowed, and basked in the adoration. This was his world. For his next piece, he announced Chopin's Etude Op. 10, No. 4, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. Leo's breath caught. He'd dreamed of playing it himself, though he'd never dared attempt it on a real piano. Julian's performance was, as expected, flawless. But as he played, he noticed something irritating. That janitor, Leo, was still standing there, his face showing an expression Julian found presumptuous. He looked connected to the music, as if he understood it. How ridiculous! What could someone like him possibly know about the years of training and pure talent required to master such pieces? Julian finished to another standing ovation. As he acknowledged the applause, his eyes found Leo again. An idea formed in his mind, a cruel way to remind everyone of the natural order of things. As the applause died down, Julian remained at the piano bench, a smirk playing on his lips. He gestured toward the back of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to deliver cheap entertainment. "I notice we have an attentive audience member back there who seems particularly moved by tonight's performance." All heads turned toward Leo, who suddenly felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. His face flushed with heat. You there, Julian continued, pointing directly at him. The man in the grey uniform. You seem to be following along quite intently. Tell me, do you play piano? The question hung in the air like a trap. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. A little, Leo managed to say, his voice barely audible. Julian's smile widened. A little? How modest. Well then, surely someone with such obvious appreciation for Chopin wouldn't mind demonstrating for our distinguished guests. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. They sensed what was happening, a master about to humble a working man who'd overstepped his bounds. Oh, I couldn't, Leo protested, taking a step back. I'm just staff. I need to. Nonsense, Julian interrupted, gesturing grandly toward the piano. Music is for everyone, isn't it? Surely you wouldn't want to disappoint our generous patrons. The trap was perfectly set. Refusing would seem ungrateful. Accepting would lead to certain humiliation. Julian had cornered him completely. Come now, Julian pressed, his tone dripping with false encouragement. What's the worst that could happen? Perhaps you've absorbed some technique through osmosis. More laughter. Leo stood frozen. He thought of his small apartment, his modest paycheck, and his place in the world. He thought of all the times he dreamed of sitting at a piano like this one, of sharing the music that lived in his heart. But mostly, he thought of his late wife, Sarah, and her voice. Leo, sometimes life gives you a moment. Don't be afraid to show them who you really are. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The scuffing of his work boots on the marble floor echoed through the suddenly silent hall. Wonderful! Julian exclaimed. Our brave volunteer. What would you like to attempt? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The audience chuckled. Leo reached the piano, his hand trembling as he touched the polished wood. Actually, he said quietly, his voice gaining strength. I was thinking of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The laughter stopped cold. Julian's smile faltered. Chopin's Ballade No. 1, he repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. My dear man, that's one of the most challenging pieces in the repertoire. It requires? I know what it requires, Leo interrupted softly, settling onto the bench. His fingers found the keys, and for the first time all evening, he felt at home. Julian laughed, but it sounded forced. Well, by all means. This should be educational. The audience held its breath. Julian stepped back, crossing his arms, ready to enjoy the spectacle of fumbled notes and utter failure. Whenever you're ready, he said with exaggerated courtesy. Leo closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter, Lily, and the promise he'd made to his wife to keep music in their lives. He opened his eyes, looked out at the sea of faces, and began to play. The first notes rang out clear and true. Julian's confident smirk vanished. The opening phrases of Chopin's ballade flowed from Leo's fingers with a clarity that sent a shockwave through the hall. These weren't the tentative notes of an amateur. They carried the touch of someone who had lived with this music for years. Julian's expression shifted from amusement to confusion to alarm. This wasn't possible. The technical precision, the emotional depth, it was as if a completely different person had sat down at his piano. As Leo moved into the ballad's main theme, his playing revealed layers of interpretation that surprised even Julian. He found nuances in the music that painted the melody in entirely new colors. The audience sat transfixed. Mrs. Albright's mouth hung slightly open. They were no longer witnessing a humiliation, but experiencing something extraordinary. Leo's fingers navigated the treacherous middle section with breathtaking ease. But more than technical skill, his playing possessed something Julian's had lacked: raw, emotional honesty. He wasn't just playing notes, he was telling the story of his life, of love found, of crushing loss, and of the fierce, quiet hope he held for his daughter. The music became a window into a soul hidden behind a janitor's uniform. Julian found himself listening, not just waiting for mistakes. He was being drawn into Leo's interpretation. How was this possible? Who was this man? The ballad's climactic section arrived, and Leo attacked it with a passion that left the audience breathless. The piano sang under his touch, as if it had been waiting for someone who truly understood its voice. As he approached the final, tragic phrases, tears began to flow down Leo's cheeks, but his playing never wavered. If anything, the emotion made his interpretation more powerful, more authentic. This wasn't just a performance. It was a revelation. Julian stood frozen, his worldview crumbling with each perfectly executed phrase. Everything he believed about talent, class, and who deserved to make music was being shattered. As the last chord faded into silence, the echo lingered in the air. No one moved. Then, slowly, Mrs. Albright rose to her feet, her eyes bright with tears. She began to clap, not with polite applause, but with the thunderous appreciation reserved for true artistry. One by one, the entire audience stood, their ovation filling every corner of the hall. Julian remained motionless, staring at Leo as if seeing him for the first time. The man he had dismissed had just delivered one of the most moving performances he'd ever witnessed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been completely, utterly wrong. Leo sat at the piano, overwhelmed. He'd never played for an audience before. Julian began, then stopped, his usual eloquence gone. He approached the piano slowly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My wife taught me," Leo replied quietly, wiping the tears from his cheeks. "Before she passed away. We were both music students, but life had other plans." Julian felt the armor of privilege he'd worn for so long crack. I owe you an apology. What I did tonight was inexcusable." "You don't owe me anything," Leo said, standing. "Music doesn't belong to any one of us. It belongs to everyone who feels it." Julian nodded slowly, humbled. Would you consider playing the second half of tonight's program? I think our audience deserves to hear more." The question hung in the air, full of possibility and redemption. "I couldn't possibly," Leo protested. "Please," Julian said, his voice now filled with genuine respect. "I've been performing for 30 years, and I've never heard Chopin played with such truth. They deserve this gift." "Yes, dear. Please continue," Mrs. Albright called out. Other voices joined in, urging him to stay. Leo looked out at the faces watching him. They weren't intimidating strangers anymore. They were people, connected by music. He thought of his wife, and of her belief that music was meant to be shared. "Perhaps one more piece," he said softly. Julian stepped back, giving him the stage completely. Leo chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had comforted him through many difficult nights. This performance was gentler, more intimate, like a lullaby filled with both sorrow and hope. In the audience, people began to reflect. Mrs. Albright thought about the service staff she barely acknowledged, wondering what hidden dreams they held. A businessman remembered his own abandoned aspirations. Julian listened with genuine admiration. Leo was a true artist. He made him remember why he'd first fallen in love with music, before fame complicated everything. As the final note faded and the audience erupted once more, Julian stepped forward and took Leo's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice thick with humility. "Tonight, you have witnessed the emergence of a true artist. Leo has reminded us all that music isn't about pedigree or prestige. It's about the courage to share what lives in your heart." 6 months later, Leo walked across the same marble floors, but everything had changed. Tonight, his name was on the program, Leo Vance, Pianist. The posters outside announced his debut recital, supported by a scholarship fund Julian had established for undiscovered talent. Mrs. Albright approached, beaming. "My dear, I can hardly believe this is the same man who was polishing the floors just 6 months ago." "I'm still the same person," Leo replied with a smile. "I just have a bigger stage now." Julian appeared at his side, no longer the arrogant performer. His encounter with Leo had profoundly changed him. Tonight, he would serve as Leo's page-turner, a role reversal that symbolized his transformation. "Nervous?" he asked. Terrified, Leo admitted. But grateful. If you hadn't challenged me that night. If I hadn't been a complete fool, you mean, Julian corrected. I almost let my arrogance destroy something beautiful. I'm still learning. The hall was sold out. The crowd hadn't come for a spectacle, they came seeking the authentic emotion that had moved them so deeply. In the front row, a little girl with bright eyes clutched a small teddy bear, watching the stage with wonder. It was Lily. As Leo took his place at the piano, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. His wife's passing had ended his musical education, forcing him into years of manual labor to support his daughter. He believed that part of his life was over. But dreams, he'd learned, never truly die. They just wait for a moment to be seen. The lights dimmed. Leo began his recital with the same Chopin ballade that had started everything. But tonight, he played it not as a challenge, but as a celebration of second chances, and the courage to be seen for who you truly are. In the audience, Julian listened with tears in his eyes. He had spent his career being technically perfect, but Leo had taught him that music's greatest power comes from its ability to connect human hearts. As the final notes rang out and the audience rose as one, a single truth echoed through the hall: sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places, played by hands that have known both struggle and hope.